Okay, once again, just in case anyone watching this hasn't played Kuro 2 yet, I still want to make the same disclaimer here. Do not watch this video if you haven't played this game, and especially if you haven't played the previous Kuro game. Go into that one as blind as possible, and I'd say you should still do the same for this one. It's better to experience things yourself and make up your own mind, and while this game has a particular reputation among fans, it's still another Trails game. If you're already a fan of the series, you'll still enjoy it. So please, don't ruin that for yourself if you can help it. You can get a copy of the Japanese PC version and use the fan patch that is linked in the OP of the Falcom General thread on 4chan, if you don't want to wait for it like me. It's a bit rough, but serviceable. Also, if you don't know anything about this series, go away, and play Trails in the Sky. Thank me later. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Kuro no Kiseki II, Crimson Sin, takes place a few months after the previous game. The first thing we see is a mysterious disguised man being pursued by the feds, Hercules, and he turns into a red version of Grendel, with a red version of what looks like Mare, Van's AI holocore. And the Hercules members get slaughtered, obviously. We get to see Swin and Nadia make their return right away as they find the aftermath of that scene, which tells us that they are going to be very major characters again. Right off the bat, I had an idea of how this game would play out. The red Grendel figure is obviously tied to the 8th Genesis. He's going to be too powerful, and the entire game will be spent figuring out a way to counter him and take it. What I ended up getting was something worse than that, I think. By the time the game ended, it felt like the story had only moved forward 1 or 2 small steps compared to the previous game's 20, if that makes sense. You'll see what I mean when we get into the spoilers. But reminder that in case you are watching this sometime in the future, this video is entirely based on my experience with the fan translation called Trails Before Dawn 2. So that experience was mostly similar to the previous game for me, except that instead of non-essential NPC dialogue being left untranslated, the Anon who worked on this translated everything with AI, and then edited over it. But the version I played was not quite finished, so it resulted in some pretty unintentionally hilarious NPC dialogue. But everything in the main story was fine for the most part, aside from a lot of typos. This was also the first game I started on Nightmare difficulty, something I probably should have been doing since at least Cold Steel 3, but whatever. I'll get into that later. As expected, this game was fairly similar to the previous one, but also with some time travel shenanigans, which strengthened my suspicion that the Septarian of Time is somehow related to this region of the world. There were a handful of returning characters from before Kuro 1, and several new characters to flesh out this part of the world, some more effectively than others. We got to visit Messeldem and Nemeth Island, but those were the only noteworthy additions to the country of Calvard for us to see. The rest were just additions to locations we've already been to, and the majority of the game is spent in locations from the first game, which was pretty disappointing. But it would have been forgivable if it felt like I wasn't being slowly dragged around for this game's whole story. The prologue involves Van and Elaine working together on an investigation into the Red Grendel, so they're getting down to business fairly quickly it seems. Much of the prologue is spent reintroducing you to the characters from around the city from the first game while they gather information. But before we move on, I want to mention something that I haven't really talked about in any of my Trails videos that's relevant to this part of the game. It's something that has been annoying me about the series since at least Cold Steel 2. Every time a recurring character gets their first moments on screen, the game treats them like they're some sort of unknown and then wastes our time revealing their name for much longer than is necessary, when we're already supposed to know who they are. Almost like they're assuming we don't know who it is when it's very easy to tell the split second they pop up on screen. I've always hated this, even for first-time introductions, because it's just an unnecessary waste of time. The flow of each scene and conversation is always busted whenever they have to stop for 10 seconds so that their name tag can float up on screen for us forgetful idiots at home. I kinda wish they would stop this because it always takes me out of the experience a little. Or if they insist on keeping introductory name tags on screen, don't just stop everything that's happening just for that. The series already has a reputation of padding out its length and wasting the player's time, and they even do it in the East series now too, which, you know, is supposed to be a fast-paced action game, so it's just one small thing they could cut down on. Anyway, let's carry on. The first original member of Van's party we come across is of course Agnes, but she doesn't join up yet. But something weird or supernatural happens when she leaves that only Van notices. Oh boy, here we go. Something crazy is going to happen, I was thinking at the time. Eventually, Van and Elaine's investigation leads them to a Republic military base, where they find that disguised man, who kills a bunch of soldiers as the Red Grendel and gives us a boss fight. But like I figured, he's too strong. Which then ends with him killing Elaine, then Van, in a really brutal scene. Then Agnes shows up and her Genesis activates, causing time to be rewound back to when that supernatural phenomenon happens. The game then gives you the illusion of choice here, which is something I'll get into later, for Van to call out to Agnes instead of letting her go, which changes the course of events and causes her to contact Kincaid to help Van and Elaine sooner than before. Once they get back to the military base, Kincaid is able to use his clearance to get straight to the Red Grendel faster, allowing them to save the soldiers from getting killed. We get another boss fight, and this time it's on much more even ground, allowing enough time to pass before Swin and Nadia show up to save the day in a signature Trails Deus Ex Machina style. Then Red Grendel dude leaves as soon as the rest of the military show up and surround them. The game then cuts away to the last few scenes of the prologue, where pretty much every major villain is shown to us briefly when they really didn't need to do this at all. They show Elroy Harwood, who we already met in the previous game, so they pretty much spoiled his involvement in this game's story right off the bat. In fact, I would describe this entire prologue as the game blowing its load way too fucking early, giving us a preview of all the villains right away, getting us in a fight with the game's most powerful actor right from the start, having a scene where your two main characters die in brutal fashion, only to be revived with this game's plot armor, and introducing us to a time travel mechanic that's destined to kill the tension and any sort of sense of consequence for anything that happens in this story. Oh, and the 8th Genesis is already found, because the Red Grendel guy has it, but it's incomplete, and we'll be spending a lot of the game going on a wild goose chase just for the pieces. Surely the rest of the game wasn't going to be able to keep the engagement up to the same level as all this insanity though, right? After the prologue, instead of going straight into Act 1, we get an interlude where Swin and Nadia are formally reintroduced. Then they are all tasked with going into a virtual reality space called Martian Garten, to quell some hacking problems or something that conveniently works out into a randomized dungeon space that works just right for our characters to fight as if they were doing it normally, with a boss at the end, which tends to be some sort of demonic entity. I'll talk more about this later, but this whole side content dungeon system is just that, side content, and has no bearing on the actual story of the game as far as I can tell. I got to the 5th level of it throughout my playthrough, then stopped entirely to save it for later, and it had no real consequence on my playthrough, story-wise or gameplay-wise, which I'll also get into later. But the only thing Van and company gets out of doing the first layer is a bunch of data that conveniently points the main cast towards something called Almada's Legacy, and to Messeldam, where their former headquarters were. From here on out in this video, I don't have any footage from anything past this segment, so it'll just be me talking over random footage that has nothing to do with what I'm saying, so keep that in mind. But if you played the game, you'll know what I'm talking about anyway. Before the game moves along, it allows us to pick between Van for side A or Swin and Nadia for side B. Van goes to Messeldam to investigate, while Swin and Nadia remain in Edith to act as Spriggans in Van's absence. Aside from that, Act 1 and 2 are fairly straightforward. Each side A results in Van reuniting with old party members from the first game and finding a piece of the 8th Genesis. Side B results in Swin and Nadia investigating some weird anomalies around the city, while getting into some serious danger. That isn't all that dangerous because time just gets rewound over and over again whenever something bad happens. To keep this part short, the main things I took away from these parts were as follows. 1. Act 1 Side A. There seems to be a major plot hole of the guy named Robin in Messeldam somehow staying hidden from everyone despite having a giant fucking cargo ship outside the city. Then he gets killed off, so I guess he just happens to not have plot armor like the rest of the characters. 2. Act 1 Side B. We got to meet Lila from Trails in the Sky again after being absent for like 7 games. Not that it matters all that much, except I guess it deconfirms her relationship with Maybell. Get wrecked, shippers. 3. Act 1 Side B. Crimson Altera is actually Lapis from Trails into Reverie, according to Swin and Nadia. I was kinda hoping this whole Singularity plotline would have been left behind, but I guess they just want to go full sci-fi from here on out. 4. Act 2 Side A. I still hate Shizuna.
No one can have that much power. It is too much.
5. Act 2 Side A. This chapter just further cemented my opinion that the Heiyue storyline is probably the most boring and uninteresting side plot of the series. Even though I like Sao Li at least, introducing Goron felt like a retcon and I could not give a fuck less about the inner workings of this bootleg Chinese mafia. 6. Act 2 Side B. The last thing I wanted was for us to have to go back to fucking high school after what we had to deal with in the Cold Steel series. But somehow, they managed to make this part pretty interesting. Or maybe I was just caught up in the shock value of this one because there was a horrible terrorist attack at the school, including an explosion that killed a lot of the kids there, and also one where anti-immigrants captured students and one of them ends up shooting one of the students as well as my girl Toa. Those parts got to me a little, not gonna lie. But of course, plot armor and all that, so everything just rewinds each time this happens. 7. Act 2 Side B. We got some creepy assassin dolls that were remnants of the Assassin's Garden underneath the school. This was the first and only time I actually got a game over, during the fight against the Grendel monsters at the end because they got some lucky death blows on my party. More on that later. But the boss after this happens to be one of the main antagonists, who reveals himself as Garden Master, and appears to look like Swin's old friend and Nadia's older brother, Ace, who's supposed to be dead. But hey, forget everything that happened in the last chapter because we're going to the beach. Fucking anime games, I swear. Everyone gets invited to a place called Nemeth Island by E.H. Obviously, this is Elroy Harwood. The game doesn't even try to make this a surprise, which is to its own detriment in my opinion. But you spend the first day there just chilling and having some silly, mild fanservice moments with everyone. There are some ruins on the island, but the one thing that sort of stands out to remind you that something here is really wrong is the creepy abandoned church along the road that made the music stop whenever you walked in. But yeah, the first day ends without any major incident, so I was not really expecting the next day to be arguably the best part of the entire game. Sort of. The fact that Harwood was directly involved meant that it was going to be something absolutely wicked, as we've gotten hints at his nature throughout the previous game, but he never really did anything significant until now, which is why I think it would have been so much better if his involvement was kept as a surprise until this point. Also, I read some vague references to this being the best part online by accident before I played the game. Thanks, Trails fans. Go fuck yourself. Anyway, we learn that Harwood has some poisonous gas devices littered throughout the island via everyone dying and having a time rewind again. But also that he betrayed Ouroboros and is working alone, so he's pretty much made himself an enemy to every single party that he gathered on the island, including the two enforcers, Walter and Lucretia. But since Van's group are the only ones who can see that time rewound, he decides to have a chat with Harwood separately before everyone else shows up, which makes everyone else on the island believe that Van is now part of the problem. So it's you against everyone else, and honestly, this felt like an excuse to just have a bunch of boss fights against every character that Falcom can throw at us, including a ton of characters we already fought once earlier in the game and in the previous game, which is kind of a theme for this one in general, to be honest. And also to force you to rewind time over and over again each time the game shoves the main cast into a fail state, which had already gotten really old at this point. With one exception. The last stop you make on the island is what looks like an abandoned laboratory, and inside you find Walter and Lucretia with Ren, who seems to be possessed. And there is some sort of cursed death virus in the air of this place that makes everyone feel strangely horrible. After they are able to rewind time and fight off the affliction with the help of the Dominions, we find that it's messing with Ren's mind and brings out one of her old personas, Cross, from the time she was trapped in paradise. Then the game plays Stairway to Gehenna from Trails in the Sky III, as this whole thing is laid out before us. This island is where paradise used to be, as well as facilities where the DG cult experimented on children about a decade ago. All of this heavy darkness in the air is the result of the lingering spirits and resentment left behind by all the atrocities that took place here. The other character who seems to be affected by this the most is Quatre, who happens to share a name with another one of Ren's old personas, but she says that the two are unrelated. I wonder about that. Later that night, Quatre goes missing. He's found with Harwood atop a ruined altar where he becomes an angelic being and goes berserk, destroying everything on the island as Harwood gives the hint that he knows that Van can rewind time somehow, right before everything rewinds again. In order to prevent this, Van has to do a few side missions around the island to soothe the angry spirits. This causes Quatre to go less berserk and hesitate in destroying everything. They're led under the ruined altar where it's revealed that Quatre's parents were in the DG cult and had him experimented on while he was still in the womb to have male and female traits, with the goal of creating a vessel that fits the depiction of angels in the scripture. But this entire underground zone is very reminiscent of other DG cult places we saw in Zero and Azure. A darkly lit underground with ritual altars, unholy symbols all over the place, vile demonic monsters roaming around, and easily one of the creepiest and most depressing songs in the entire game playing in the background. It was quite possibly the most memorable new location introduced in this game, at least for me. I could feel the heavy regret and despair just wandering around looking at this place while listening to that music. Oh, but then they threw a really annoying boss fight against Ix and Yolda against us, as they threatened to blow up everything with one of those crazy reactor weapons and force a rewind if we don't KO them both in the same hit in battle. And since they have Gerard's sword and are able to use it, they reveal that he is their father. If the cult couldn't get any more fucked up, they were born from women who were offered to Gerard to keep his bloodline going. But these two kids don't really seem to care. And also, they actually love to kill, and made it out as the last two survivors of Melchior's garden after he ordered everyone to kill each other. Damn. At the end of this dungeon, we get our showdown with Harwood finally, who's trying to open a spiritual gate to a higher plane. This gate was connected to the island by the DG cult after all the sacrifices made in the past before Ouroboros put a stop to it, but Harwood's meddling here caused it to reopen, with Ren and Quatre's trauma being the final key to unlock it. But with everyone there to stop him, they were able to close the gate with the help of their orbments as magic conduits, along with Ren's old personas giving her the push she needed, before something really terrible came out, like probably one of the 77 devils. Would have been a very interesting and shocking turn of events if that had actually worked. Whenever one of those devils shows up, it tends to bring out some real shit. But then Red Grendel shows up and we get another fight with him. Then Garden Master shows up and Swin betrays everyone and steals the Genesis to give to Garden Master, who he sees as Ace. Betraying Nadia seemed very out of character for him. Something weird is going on, I thought. Unfortunately, after that absolute wild roller coaster of an intermission, this leads into what's easily the worst act of the entire game. Act 3 is the part that drags this story out like crazy, with each part basically working the same way. One or more of our allies is suddenly corrupted, with their minds altered to believing a different timeline is the truth, turning them against Van for one reason or another, so they try to kill him, rewinding time over and over again to get each of them to remember the truth about what just happened. I don't even want to talk about most of the plot points in this act because the entire thing felt like an utter waste of time, with the last part bringing everyone back to the day before the entire act even started after they get all the Genesis back. But hey, we get to beat up some tanks. Not a series first though. This was also one of those acts that basically exist to throw all the game's characters at you as bosses. At this point, I was starting to find the combat really tiresome, part of it probably being the nightmare difficulty, but that's just me maybe. But the final part of the act was the only part that really matters, as they were able to use the Genesis to pinpoint where the corruption is coming from, and they find it's a phase space created by Garden Master using the data he stole from Martian Garten. With the help of Lucretia's divergent weapon from the Grandmaster, they are able to infiltrate and confront him, but not before giving Swin a bonk on the head for betraying everyone. He retreats, then we confront Garden Master and Grendel's Olga again. But then Garden Master seems to be able to rewind time, at least in this location. As Nadia tries to chastise him, claiming he is not the real Ace, he tries to kill her, which causes Swin to turncoat again to save her in a scene that reminded me of when Joshua broke out of Weissman's Stigma control near the end of Sky SC. Then Zolga loses the 8th Genesis and Nadia steals Altera away from them, causing Zolga to dissipate, as he is only an existence born out of the 8th Genesis. Garden Master is revealed to actually be Auguste Ardant, someone who betrayed the main actors of the Calvardian Revolution a century ago, who was brought back to life using Ace's body as a host by the DG cult. He is kind of a mid-villain here, to be honest. Then we get a boss fight that was actually pretty tough, and I barely survived with only Grendel Van left with 83 HP. Almost had a second game over. Almost. But Auguste's defeat results in a massive implosion, which sucks in Altera, and Swin and Nadia try to save her. They end up in what seems like a spiritual plane where they get a final reunion with the real Ace, reminiscent of Lloyd's final reunion with Guy at the end of Azure. Outside, Altera gets her memories as Lapis back, and she becomes a hollow core for them, but the 8 Genesis seemingly lose their power. For the finale, we fast forward a few weeks to the high school festival segment of the game. Mostly uninteresting side fluff. The best ones were a couple of Connect events, one being Van taking Ren out on a date to get her mind off stuff, which turns out to be a request from Estelle and Joshua, and then restore Pottermotter's AI into a hollow core. That was cool. The other one being Van teaching Yume to ride her first bike, which was adorable as fuck. We also did finally get a generic monster extermination side quest that has a twist with an extra surprise fight. Biggest plot twist in the game, just saying. But then right as the festival reaches its peak, Van leaves on his own to answer another mysterious message he gets from C. I have to question what the writers were thinking with this. It's almost like Van suddenly forgot everything that happened since the beginning of the first game, and planned to throw himself at the problem alone yet again, despite knowing that his allies would literally dive into the depths of hell just to pull him out of it like they did at the end of the previous game. I guess it's just to have a comedy moment where they chastise him again, but come on. It just seems like a lapse in consistency in character development, as this would have made sense in the last game, but less so now. Unless he really is that stubborn, I guess. Anyway, before everyone else shows up to boo at him, Nina comes in and reveals herself as some sort of saintly figure that we really don't get much of an explanation for, but she allows them to enter a phase space where C is. Oh, and Lapis wakes up from her core and introduces herself to everyone, which was cute. So they go into the Octradium dimension, the game's final dungeon-looking final dungeon. Before we get to C, we have to fight Harwood, Ix, and Yolda again, who made it in with the help of Lucretia. Honestly, the only reason they're here is for the game to give us an excuse to have one more boss fight with them, as the only thing that happens afterwards is Harwood naming the 2 kids as Enforcer 20 of Ouroboros. I don't think having them do it here of all places was necessary, but hey, game's gotta follow its own trend, I guess. Finally, we get to the end, and C turns out to be the disguised man who turns into Grendel Zolga, whose real identity is actually Dingo Brad. Except not. His consciousness was recreated by the 8th Genesis using the Orbal Network? I guess Brad's consciousness was somehow observed by the 7th Genesis right before he died in the explosion by Gerard at Krael Village, and recreated as Vendel Zolga to observe the sins of humanity. This whole point seems like Falcom made it the fuck up after Kuro won, but who knows. Final boss fight time. We get to fight a giant Grendel Zolga that can force you out of the turn-based battle into action combat randomly, which was weird but kind of a cool last-minute mechanics twist I was clearly not expecting because he almost killed me. Then you also get to refight the old bosses from Kuro 1 all over again, which was kind of annoying to be honest. But overall, it was a pretty satisfying boss fight / boss rush for the finale. After that, Lapis allows Marielle to enter and give Dingo Brad her last goodbyes, and also connects Rufus to have one final chat with him as well, which was a nice cameo for the end. Too bad he never showed up in person in-game though. Back to reality, the Genesis get their energy back. They all finish the dance festival at the high school because everything that happened in the Octradium conveniently only took a few minutes of time in the real world or something. Because of course. And that's the story. Oh yeah, there's also the post-game. Martian Garten higher levels. Honestly, this thing sucks. It seemed extremely half-baked, and the amount of randomization just isn't enough to make it not feel ultra-repetitive, as some floors just reuse the same one layout for each part, and I tapped out. I haven't reached the end because it was too fucking boring. I don't know if there's any story significance at the end of it all, but I think I can easily claim that Reverie did it better anyway. I heard that most of it wasn't even in the game at launch in Japan, only added in a patch later on, so that's very telling. So, this was a very flawed entry in the series, but still enjoyable overall, despite my consistent bitching in the video. I can't help but have some serious concerns for the series going forward though. The shift in focus to super high technology such as the Orbital Network, AI, singularities, virtual reality and all that, rather than exploring the deep lore, the history of the continent, and the relation between the mortal and spiritual planes, is one of the main disappointments I have with this supposedly fantasy series that has been bugging me for a long time, going all the way back to the Crossbell games. Maybe that's just a subjective preference, but it makes me wonder if they really have the important backdrop of all these stories actually planned out before they make them sometimes. We really only got a bit of that in the intermission segment of the game, and while it was one of the most interesting parts of the game, it mostly served to flesh out the now rather than the past. The DG cult is said to date back to the Middle Ages of this universe, but the vast majority of the subject matter that seems to be relevant to anything going on in these games happens within the past 10 to 20 years, with Kia being the main exception. Aside from the cult, I wish they would flesh out the Middle Ages a bit more in upcoming games somehow, as well as give us another glimpse into what Zemuria was like before the Great Collapse, as we really haven't gotten anything from that era since Trails in the Sky SC. But that's just my own selfish wants for this series in general. When it comes to this game in particular, the biggest problem is probably the time travel shenanigans. It betrayed one of the best things we got in the previous game, that being when the story got serious, it was really tense and really felt like everyone was in real danger, with the possibility of anyone actually dying at any time, except the main cast of course. Something that was very new to the series because the previous Cold Steel games felt more like a throwaway children's cartoon with barely any stakes. I was sucked in and more engaged with the story than I had been since Trails in the Sky III, but this sequel kinda ruined some of that, and I think the time travel is the main culprit. Like I complained about Deus Ex Machina moments being some of the worst aspects of the series in my top 10 least favorite Trails moments video, and this game brought that to a whole new level. But there's something even worse about it this time because these dead-end timeline moments where someone dies kind of fly in the face of the series' track record. Like it might seem to come out of nowhere whenever it happens, but if that's the case, why haven't things like this been happening throughout every other game? The amount of times the main characters just die is so much higher than normal that it doesn't make sense. Maybe I could forgive it if it was more sparingly used, but every time something really bad like that happened, the time rewind just made it lose any meaning or impact. By contrast, the surprisingly numerous deaths in the previous game were very important, much more impactful, and made sense given the context of the story. I guess you could explain it away by the fact that time and causality is being fucked with by Grendel, Zolga, and Garden Master throughout the game, but it just doesn't make for a compelling narrative, at all. Because you know that any bad consequence can simply be undone by magic timey-wimey nonsense. I guess it's possible this aspect of the story can be saved depending on how they incorporate the Septarian of Time into the story in the future, but I can't really think of a good way they could do that without it seeming overly contrived and nonsensical. Another thing that made this time travel thing disappointing was the illusion of choice the game presents us with when the story rewinds. It would have been much more interesting if it gave you, the player, more control in making sure events play out in the best way possible by making things more open-ended, which would take the investigation aspect of the games to a whole new level that we haven't really seen before. Like if you don't discover all the clues to solving something before it happens, or if you could choose incorrectly at certain points of the game, not knowing the results beforehand, or if your law-gray chaos alignment played a part in how Van decides to carry out each event, giving you alternate routes not possible otherwise. I guess having the time travel choices like this would drag the story out even longer though, but at least it would give us more control as a video game player, you know? That's part of why I liked the inclusion of the alignment system in the previous game in the first place. But speaking of which, it was also really disappointing to see the alignment system have no bearing on anything whatsoever this time, at least as far as I could tell. It pretty much only exists as a reused asset relic. Another thing that's kind of annoying is the reliance on these plot devices called shards. From what I can tell, they are just orbital energy manifesting into physical objects. I don't think this concept has been explained very well so far, and its sudden appearance into the series feels like a massive retcon. Maybe I'm wrong and there are other things from previous games that are functionally identical to shards like those Magic Knights in Erebonia maybe. But I hope this gets explained properly in the future, because orbital energy manifesting as physical objects seems like a massive deal to the laws of the universe. We've also had 2 games, and we still don't have an explanation for who or what Mare actually is, how the Grendel actually works, or an explanation of what the extent of the Genesis power and functions are. We met 2 new dominions with 2 new stigmas, you know, Those important and probably very serious plot devices usually associated with some sort of dark power or past trauma. Kind of an important thing that's been glossed over for the past several games where one has showed up. We also don't really understand how certain characters are just able to sense others or know things before they happen without any context clues, but I guess we're just supposed to mindlessly accept that one as an anime quirk or something. It's getting kind of annoying. Oh yeah, we're also supposed to just go along with the existence of Shizuna and her OP Black God One Blade style and her impossible superhuman abilities without either game going into that at all, while she toys and flirts with the main cast just for the sake of being waifu bait. God, I hate that character. Out of everyone in the main cast, the way she's written just makes her seem like she isn't even human like everyone else. Just a shitty cartoon character. Probably gonna get salt for calling your waifu trash, so let's move on. I think I've covered all my thoughts and concerns, so let's talk about the gameplay next. For the most part, gameplay is pretty much the same from the previous game. Most of the actual improvements were small things that made certain aspects better, like adding spells to field battles. One thing that got majorly nerfed was S-crafts, which you can no longer spam twice in a row. Instead, you have to wait until your boost runs out before you can use another one. And this was probably for the better because S-craft spamming was broken as hell in the first one. But to offset this heavy nerf, you have EX Drive, which allows team attacks to get a massive power boost on stunned enemies. I think this worked pretty well to make the game more balanced, but another thing that's still broken is the shield function, especially Reset's Craft, which gives you a shield and defense bonus, and I think they made it even stronger than the first game. That alone made her the best support character by far. Tanking with Van is still the most broken aspect in the game though, and this was made very obvious when Van wasn't in the party, because without question, the hardest fights in the game were all fairly early on in Act 1 and 2, when we take control of Swin and Nadia instead. There were so many close calls with them, and the only time I died was in one of their boss battles in Act 2, though it was mainly because of the enemy's lucky death blow attacks. Damn RNG. But that was the only time I actually died. There was one other time I restarted a battle because I missed the SP requirement for not having any characters get KO'd during a strong boss battle, which comes up several times throughout the game, and it was kind of annoying. But still, that's this game's nightmare mode. Kuro 1 would probably have been just as easy too, but I played that one on hard. But remember that throughout this game, you can access Martian Garten for some free grinding almost any time you need it. The game sort of implies that it expects you to keep up with whatever new levels are added every now and then as you progress the story. And if you were to do that, this game would be even more of a cakewalk. It goes up to level 9 or 10 by the end of the story, but I only cleared level 5, meaning I was technically underpowered for most of the latter half of the game, allegedly, and I still found it pretty damn easy. Compared to the dumpster fire that is Trails in the Sky on Hard or Nightmare, this was nothing. So I think they gotta work on balancing the mechanics out a little more going forward. Oh yeah, the characters still yell those same annoying battle chatter lines every 2 seconds between actions. Fucking stop that shit. Outside of combat, the game gives you this scanner device, which is used to find access points for Martian Garten, find little shard fragment thingies to trade in for free loot, and find fishing spots, god damn it! Why did they have to bring back fishing?
Stop it. Get some help.
Okay, to be fair, this fishing minigame wasn't all that bad, really. Fairly quick and painless with no button mashing at least. There were a few more minigames such as the hacking thing with Mare, which was kinda lame to be honest, basketball minigame which sucked balls, a new card game that's really simple and kinda fun, but too dependent on RNG in my opinion. We got to drive a truck around in the intermission which, really makes me think of some interesting ideas that I know they won't do, but since Van's truck is kind of a big deal to him, I wish we could drive it around ourselves from place to place in the next games. I doubt they'll be able to do that, but still. The music in this game was kind of a letdown. It's probably one of the weakest overall soundtracks in the series. A lot of the intense battle themes are just noisy as hell for no good reason, and really started to grate on me the more they looped. Especially one of the boss themes called Line of Non-Negotiable, that has this really jarring keyboard solo that just sounds fucking awful. I've become aware recently that the composer of this song, Mitsuo Singa, has quite a large subsection of the Falcom fanbase that really hate his music compared to most other Falcom composers. And if you're one of them watching this video, just know that I totally understand you now. After looking into it a little more, a lot of the songs I dislike the most just happen to be his work too. But credit where credit is due, he does have a fair amount of good songs, like that song that plays in the underground of Nemeth Island I mentioned earlier, and it may be my favorite song in the game. It's a trend I've noticed in both of these games actually. The game's music shines more when it's trying to create a subdued, moody, or chill atmosphere, while these noisy J-rock songs with some cheesy violin parts that are used for action and battles tend to really blow. I think they should really try and move away from these kind of tracks in general. I know it's been a tradition for the series, especially for the shitty, cheesy anime opening songs, but I think it would serve the series more to abandon this cliche altogether. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know. I just think the music should serve the universe more than just doing the thing that's trendy. I feel like I've said something like this before somewhere. Couple other random thoughts I had while doing this. The first is that I found it odd that it was supposedly winter at the start of the game's story, but the environment doesn't really reflect that very well. It was still sunny, people were still going about their business like it wasn't even cold at all, and Edith pretty much looked exactly the same as it did throughout all of the previous game. The only time we even see any snow is in Messeldem, but it only snows a little bit and doesn't really impact much of anything. I guess it kind of makes sense since it's a coastal town. But then when we go to Dirk Memorial Park, where the leaves on the trees and stuff were still there, but kind of orange and brown as if it was fall, not winter. It's not a significant detail, but it's one of those things that, in addition to a lot of other problems the game has, makes me think this game was rushed and not polished properly before launch. I've heard that this game was allegedly one of Falcom's more buggy releases when it came out, but I haven't really confirmed that. I had a few glitches and display issues in my playthrough, some of which I thought was just a product of the fan patch, but it's hard to tell. But one thing I do know is that some of the Martian Garten levels weren't even in the game when it came out. They were added in an update. Kind of disappointing to hear, but I guess when we get it over in the West, it should all be there at launch, right? Nisa, I remember what you did to Disgaea 1 Complete, you fucks. The last one is kind of a touchy subject that's kind of political, so if you want to skip this part, feel free. I don't really like to talk about this stuff on my channel normally, but it's one that I couldn't escape thinking about while playing the game, and it leads into something I've seen people complain about when it comes to both Kuro games. I've seen them describe this new arc as woke, believe it or not. After I played the first game, I had no idea what they could have been talking about. This series has had political allegories to historical and real-world events, going all the way back to the first game, so seeing something like that in any of these games shouldn't be surprising at all, especially now that the level of technology and civilization is at a state roughly equal to the modern world as of at least Reverie. We were introduced to this universe's version of the Middle East, with some plot points about their different culture and struggles living in Calvard. But that's been a long time coming, and plenty of other JRPGs have done similar things in the past. We have a very flamboyantly gay man, Bermati, being a major character that helps out every now and then, but he's such a lovable dork that I can't imagine not liking having him in the game. But I think playing the second game made me sort of get it. There's a plot point that keeps popping up that's supposed to serve as part of the game's world building, yet I don't think they're doing a good job of it. There's a faction of people in Calvard who are staunchly anti-immigrant, and it's presented in a very black and white way. Whenever they rear their ugly heads, they're usually committing some sort of treachery or even terrorism, which clearly makes them the bad guys, but even after playing through both of these games, I just don't get them. Like, their motivation seems to be, I don't like foreigners because they're foreign, or they want to preserve or restore the old Calvard traditions thinking that an influx of immigrants will destroy them. The latter making sense at least, if we even knew anything about these old Calvard traditions at all. Like, the only hints we have are the old nobility might be similar in some ways to the nobility we saw in Erebonia during the Cold Steel games. We could have had an interesting chance to learn about it in Kuro 1 when we visited Oracion, but the insanity of that chapter's events didn't really allow the time, just a few short side quests. So I feel like if they want to keep this subject going, they need to flesh it out more, but I doubt they will because it has barely anything to do with the main story anyway. I thought they would have since the anti-immigrants have been mentioned a few times in previous games, but I guess not. I can't remember when the earliest one was, but it might have been as far back as the Sky Trilogy. So if you really were a fan of the series, you would have seen this subject coming for quite a long time. I guess it all depends on what happens in future games, if anything happens at all. We may have games set in the Middle East and Far East, the latter having some bizarre phenomenon that's destroying the land somehow and turning it into a desert, which is part of what's forcing people to emigrate in the first place. People seem to conveniently forget this also happened with the Salt Pale, forcing a lot of very white North Ambrians to emigrate to various places around the continent, and all the other horrible shit those people had to go through. But if, ultimately, the sort of racism sentiments only go one way, and for example, if we go to El Saim and there's not a single person who's trying to kick the Calvardians or Far Easterners out of their home, and only the whites are portrayed as the racists in this universe, maybe then you could justifiably call it woke. But even then, it only is if this whole subplot was an attempt at making an allegory towards real life. If it makes sense in-universe, that's the most important thing, of course. But for now, just wait. Or just stop playing the series if it rustles your jimmies, I guess. Go play Spider-Man 2 if you want a truly woke game. One thing I forgot to do for the last video was talk about who my favorite characters were, as I was mostly focused on the events, so here we go. I made a tier list for all the characters, new and recurring, that appear in these two games. Van is one of my favorite protagonists now, and I really wish I had played these games before I made my JRPG protagonists video. That said, this second game almost knocked him down a spot because he's still being coy with Elaine, and it's still kind of annoying. And the fact that he left to go find C by himself at the end, which goes against everything he supposedly learned from pretty much everything we've played through up until this point. But I still loved him overall, and he was a refreshing departure from your typical annoying teen anime boy that plagues this genre of games. Ren also gets the top spot because we all love Rennie. I don't need to explain that one. A tier has Yume, the unstoppable cuteness overload, truly the most powerful force in the series. Then we have the exact fucking opposite, Elroy Harwood, truly one of the most terrifying characters this series has introduced to us so far. We saw a lot of him in the second game, but I can't help but want to see more. Aaron was awesome because of his bants with Van, and I just love smart-ass characters like him. Then Toa, because Toa is Toa. She and the next two are bias picks due to their history in the series, as seeing Jack and Hallie show up was really cool, and I loved their personalities. Dingo because he's a bro. His death kinda got to me in the first game, not gonna lie. Having him show up again was kinda weird, but It wasn't a Cold Steel 4 ending, so it was fine. Next, Walter, because he's a fucking badass, and I love the segments where he joined the party to kick the shit out of everyone. He really got a glow up compared to his Trails in the Sky appearances. Lastly, Melchior, who was another terrifying psychotic villain that really stole his show in the first game. The rest of the list you can see for yourself. I already explained my F tier, so don't at me. I have Emperor in brief cameo, though he was mentioned quite a lot, to the point I thought they were going to bring him back to life in this game at some point, but that never happened. The question mark tier are characters I thought might show up, but never did, except for that purple hair girl. I forget who she is. Oh well, that's it. And that's it for this video too. Feel free to shit on my tier list in the comments if you want, or let me know what you think of my level 1 takes. Or just post your general thoughts on Kuro 2 or the series in general up to this point. This time you can be as spoiler happy as you want, so don't hold back. Well, until the next game comes out, of course. No Kuro 3 spoilers here, or whatever the next game will be called. But yeah, feel free to check out my other videos, such as my top 10 favorite and least favorite moments in the Trail series, if you haven't seen it yet, or my top 10 favorite and least favorite JRPG protagonist and antagonist, and also check out my RNG, Random News of Gaming series, which is a monthly roundup of gaming news, with some console fanboy salt sprinkled in every now and then, followed up by a list of indie and lesser-known non-AAA garbage game releases that may have flown under your radar. I try to make it entertaining, but it's probably cringe. Still, I think you might enjoy it. Otherwise, you can follow me on the Twitter, or X, Rumble, and Odyssey, or join my humble Discord server where you may or may not get a free ticket to join Ouroboros. Totally legit, bro. And as always, have high standards, low expectations.